The Thing. Ben Grimm is the heart and soul of the Fantastic Four, but man did he ever get the short end of the cosmic stick when those rays hit his spacecraft. I feel for the guy because while his buddies got to be invisible or stretch, Ben turned into a giant pile of orange bricks. Here's why it sucks. Being a rock monster is a total nightmare for his dating life, since his skin is so hard it's basically high-grade sandpaper. I can't even imagine trying to cuddle with your girlfriend is a soft human and you are essentially a walking chimney. On top of that, Ben carries this massive weight of psychological trauma because he genuinely views himself as a hideous freak who doesn't deserve love, which is unfortunate because I think he's actually the sweetest in the group. But that's not even the worst part. It is the sheer physics of being a multi-ton rock man in a standard bedroom. He lives in constant terror that one excited move could literally crush a partner like a soda can under a steamroller. Even though he eventually finds happiness with Alicia Masters, their version of intimacy carries a lot of careful positioning, if you know what I mean. Wither. If the Thing needs to consider not doing a doggy, this guy has to make sure no part of him is touching his partner. Kevin Ford has what I consider the absolute worst mutant power in the history of the X-Men, and I've seen Maggot. Most kids wake up with laser eyes or wings, but Kevin woke up and accidentally turned his his entire body into a pile of laundry and bone dust. That is because his power is a constant involuntary decay field that turns anything organic into ash the second he lays hands on it. I honestly get depressed just reading his issues because the poor kid is a walking biohazard who can't even get a high five. This means any form of romantic physical connection is a literal death sentence for whoever is basically standing across from him. Basically, Death Note without the note. He cannot hold a hand or share a kiss without his partner disintegrating into a gray cloud of organic soot within seconds. It's a level of isolation that would break anyone, and it definitely turned him into a deeply angsty, emotionally starved wreck. He tried wearing a containment suit for a while, but that's basically like dating a giant Ziploc bag. Unless he finds a girlfriend made of pure vibranium or diamond, he's stuck in a permanent state of lethal celibacy. Though I doubt Emma Frost would want him. Killer Frost. Dr. Caitlin Snow is a brilliant scientist who got shoved into a thermodynamic engine, which sounds like a really bad day at the office. This accident turned her into Killer Frost, a literal heat vampire who needs to suck the warmth out of living things just to stay conscious. Her body temperature is perpetually sub-zero, so she's constantly shivering in an agonizing frozen state. What makes it even worse is that her survival instinct is completely automatic, meaning her body hunts for heat whether she wants it or not. So if she tried to get intimate with someone, she would involuntarily drain every single calorie of warmth from their body in a heartbeat. A simple hug would leave her partner looking like a human popsicle found at the bottom of a deep freezer. Because of this, touching another person isn't an act of affection for her, it is a predatory biological necessity that ends in a funeral. Basically, her very life depends on killing the people she likes, which I think might be worse than being ugly. That's why it's hard to have a Netflix and chill night when the chillest part is actually fatal. The Glob Herman. Imagine doing it with someone, but you can literally see their organs through their skin. Robert Glob Herman is easily the weirdest looking student at the Xavier Institute, and I'm obsessed with how gross his anatomy is. That's because his mutation turned him into a floating skeleton encased in a massive translucent blob of pink bioparaffin, which, if you don't know what that is basically living wax. First of all, he doesn't have skin, so he's constantly sloughing off sticky, gooey layers of whatever himself he sits in. Secondly, everyone can see his internal organs and bones at all times, which is a total mood killer for anyone trying to get romantic and lets you find livers sexy. What makes his situation worse is that his wax body is incredibly flammable, meaning friction is basically his greatest enemy. So one intense romantic moment could literally cause him to burst into flames like a giant pink scented candle. If that wasn't enough, he doesn't have normal sensory organs or human texture, so physical intimacy would feel like hugging a giant warm bucket of Vaseline. I personally find him hilarious, but I can see why he struggles to find a date when his body is basically a fire hazard. He's honestly a sweet guy, but most people aren't looking for a boyfriend who doubles as a giant blob of earwax. Element Girl. I've been wanting to talk about Erin Blackwell for a long time because her story is one of the most tragic things I've ever read in a comic book, mostly because she asked for this. She wanted to be like Metamorpho, who could change his body in any element to help her spy career, but the Orb of Ra decided to turn her into a permanent chemical nightmare. Unlike her peer, she can't turn back to a normal human, so she's stuck looking like a patchwork quilt of mud and gas. Her body is constantly shifting mass of unstable elements from the periodic table, which makes physical intimacy a literal chemistry experiment. So touching her might mean you get a face full of toxic lead, or accidentally inhale a cloud of sentient nitrogen, or worse, death. On top of that, she doesn't even have a stable biological form anymore. She's just a walking pile of volatile compounds. But the worst part is the psychological toll of feeling like a science project gone wrong, leading her to total isolation. In the Sandman comics, her misery is so absolute that she begs for death just to escape her immortal inorganic existence. She spent years sitting in an apartment alone because nobody wants to cuddle with a pile of radioactive phosphorus. Spam ones in the chat if this is tragic and you cried. Eternity Girl. Caroline Sharp is a former secret agent who got exposed to a reality warping artifact, and now she basically exists in a state of cosmic static. Her body is an elemental shapeshifter bound to fundamental forces, which sounds cool until you realize she can't even stay in one piece. That's because her physical form is so unstable that she constantly threatens to unravel into pure energy or abstract geometric shapes. Touching her is incredibly dangerous because you might get sucked into a localized reality tear or just pass right through her. That is why she suffers from such intense dissociation and depression that the very idea of human connection feels alien to her. It's gotten so much worse that every single time she tries to end her life, but her body just agonizingly reassembles itself every single time. She is so focused on trying to achieve non-existence that there is zero room in her brain for something like relationship. As a result, she's physically and mentally disconnected from the human race, floating through life as a tragic, indestructible ghost of her former self. In the end, she really puts the eternal into internally screaming. This is supposed to be a funny video, but it got dark really quick. My bad, guys. Negative Man. Some people have mommies as their type, but this guy has a typo and instead gets turned into a mummy. Larry Traynor was a hotshot test pilot who flew into a radioactive belt and came back as a glowing, translucent skeleton. To keep from melting the skin off his friends, he has to stay wrapped in lead-lined bandages from head to toe. That means he lives his entire life as a literal mummy, with zero skin-to-skin contact ever being possible. If he ever took those bandages off to kiss someone, he would give them a lethal dose of radiation before they could even say hello. Though I would argue kissing someone with chapped lips might be worse. On top of that, he has a sentient being made of dark energy living inside him, which makes three's a crowd a very literal problem. That's not the end of it, because his lack of tactile sensation through all those heavy treated layers of cloth makes him trapped in a prison of his own making, unable to feel the warmth of another person without committing accidental homicide. I've always found his isolation particularly heartbreaking because he remembers what it was like to be a handsome, normal guy. Now he's just a radioactive ghost in a jumpsuit who can never feel a breeze on his face again. Spider-Man. Marvel writers like to torture Spider-Man in the worst ways possible, but the Peter Parker from the Spider-Man Reign universe is easily the most depressing version of the wall crawler I have ever encountered. He's an old man living in a dark future, but the real kicker is the story of how his wife, Mary Jane, died. Turns out that Peter's radioactive blood doesn't just give him cool powers, it turned all of his body fluids into lethal poison. So he spent years unknowingly poisoning Mary Jane every time they were intimate, eventually giving her terminal cancer. That's when the guilt of knowing his love literally killed her completely shattered his mind and forced him into total isolation. To make things worse, he can never be with anyone else because his very DNA is a radioactive death sentence. Though I doubt he'll ever be with someone else, knowing he never moves on from MJ. This version of Spidey isn't just a hero. He's a walking catastrophe who ruined the one good thing in his life. He lives in a basement talking to ghosts because he's terrified of ever touching another human being again. I think this is the one of the darkest things Marvel has ever published, and it makes every other Spider-Man story look like a comedy. He gives toxic relationship a literal meaning that nobody ever asked for. Wonder Man. Simon Williams is basically a living battery in a human suit, which is way more complicated than it sounds on paper. After Baron Zemo messed with his physiology, Simon became a being compressed entirely of solid ionic energy rather than meat and bones. Because of that, he doesn't have any of the biological functions that make a human human, so he doesn't eat, breathe, or age. While he looks like a handsome actor, his skin is invulnerable and lacks the natural warmth or softness of an actual person. On top of that, he doesn't have DNA, or probably even a wee-wee, so any attempt at intimacy is basically just him simulating human behavior. But it gets dark once you know his energy levels can fluctuate, making him accidentally intangible or dangerously radioactive during sex. That's why he carries this deep existential dread, because he knows he is an immortal construct playing pretend in a world of mortal people. He could go through the motions of a relationship, but he's essentially a high-tech hologram with a physical footprint. Sometimes it's hard to feel a spark with someone when you are literally, made of sparks. Hazmat. You know your sex life is cooked when you realize you have to wear a hazmat suit for the rest of your life. Jenny Takeda is a student at Avengers Academy who has to live her entire life inside a giant yellow hazmat suit for everyone's safety. That's because her mutation causes her body to constantly leak deadly radiation, neurotoxins, and various horrific diseases. She can't even breathe the same air as other people without them collapsing into a pile of melted organs. This means she has never felt the touch of another person since her powers manifested, which has made her understandably incredibly bitter. On top of that, her suit is thick and mechanical, preventing her from feeling any kind of subtle tactile sensation from the outside world. I can't help but think of the emotional torture of being a teenager who just wants to hold someone's hand but knows it would be a war crime. Just when you think she doesn't have any romance, she eventually dated a guy named Metal because he was made of metal and couldn't be poisoned. But even then, it was just clanking armor together. She was trapped in a portable prison that keeps the world safe from her, but keeps her entirely alone. She's honestly one of my favorite young Avengers, but yeah, it's a pretty rough life when your signature scent is literally mustard gas and uranium. Vision. The Vision is a synthesoid, which is just a fancy way of saying he's a robot built with synthetic organs and a human brain pattern. Even though he's been married and had kids, the logistics of his physical existence are a complete mechanical headache. First off, he's made of a plastic silicone vibranium, so he lacks any real biological drive or hormones. While he can manipulate his density to feel soft or solid, it's all just a pre-programmed simulation of human intimacy. He could try making himself feel more human, but I'd say a clanker is still a clanker. On top of that, just like Wonder Man, he doesn't have DNA, so his children usually have to be created through some kind of reality warping magic or lab equipment. Like the ones he had with Wanda. Those are made up by her. There are also times when his personality can be wiped or reset, turning him into a cold emotionless calculator at any moment. When he's in his white vision phase, he has zero interest in romance because he views getting laid as a pointless expenditure of energy. He spends a lot of time trying to understand love, but at the end of the day, he's a very advanced toaster with an identity crisis. At least he never forgets an anniversary with that hard drive brain. Swarm. You know what's worse than getting stung by bees? Getting backshots from them. Fritz von Meyer is a former Nazi who got eaten by a swarm of mutated bees, and honestly, he kind of deserved it. Now his consciousness lives inside the hive mind, and he uses a literal swarm of radioactive bees as his clothes because apparently Balenciaga is not drippy anymore. That's why he doesn't have a body anymore. He's just a collection of thousands of stinging insects buzzing around a skeleton. So for me, there's absolutely no way to be intimate with a guy who is made of angry flying needles that are also radioactive, unless you're kinky. Not only that, his mind is mostly occupied by the singular aggressive thoughts of the hive, so he doesn't really have human desires. In conclusion, he is an entomological horror show who has zero skin, zero nerves, and zero chance of ever going on a second date. I don't think anyone is looking for a relationship where cuddling involves thousands of venomous insects crawling into your ears. I guess you could say his love life is really stinging him where it hurts. That was a bad joke, I'm sorry. Rogue. Rogue is the poster child for tragic superhero isolation, and her story has been breaking my heart since the 90s cartoon. Her power is a complete no-touch zone because she absorbs the life force and memories of anyone she makes skin contact with. That's why she spent her entire young life terrified of accidentally killing her friends or putting her boyfriends into a permanent coma. This means she has to wear gloves and high collars even in the middle of a summer heat wave, which to me sounds miserable. On top of that, the stolen memories stay in her head, so if she did touch someone, she'd end up with her entire personality screaming in her brain. What I love, though, is her long-running romance with Gambit, where they spend decades staring longingly at each other without being able to share a simple kiss. That's why they only do it on special occasions where they're ready to risk everything for love, which is poetic. Rogue is basically a woman who's starving for affection, but knows that a single moment of weakness could be fatal for the person she loves. It's honestly a shame we can't even touch her considering how much of a baddie she is. Man-Thing. Last but not least, we have one of my personal favorites in the supernatural genre, Man-Thing. I haven't gotten the chance to discuss him as much, so I'm super excited to finally talk about him. Dr. Ted Sallis turned into the Man-Thing after injecting himself with experimental serum and crashing into a magical swamp, which is a classic comic book Tuesday. Now, he is a mindless, slow-moving pile of muck, roots, and swamp water wandering the Florida Everglades. The thing that makes him unlatable is he has completely lost his human intelligence and personality, so he doesn't even know what romance is anymore. He is an empathetic creature that reacts to the emotions of others, but he doesn't have any organs or biological needs of his own. On top of that, his body also secretes a powerful acid that burns anyone who feels fear while touching him. And to make things worse, he looks like a giant moss monster. So almost everyone is terrified when they see him, and they immediately catch fire the second he reaches out. He is essentially a walking pile of animate compost that accidentally incinerates anyone who gets too close. That's why no sloppy toppy is possible for a creature that is literally made of leaves and doesn't even have a brain to process feelings. I suppose he's great for the environment, but he's definitely terrible for a long-term relationship. That's it for this one. If you liked the video, hit that like button, subscribe for more, and ring the bell so you never miss a drop. Craving more stories from comics, movies, and beyond? Check out this video right here. Cheers, and see you in the next one.